Season 4 of the Jimmy Butler saga is off to the races down in South Beach as the relationship between the Heat and their superstar seems to be fractured beyond repair. Jimmy Butler's trade request has become as public as ever, and some are speculating a potential return to the Sixers. I'm here to be the voice of reality and say why this should not be the case, particularly with what it would cost to make this happen and the overall situation that it would put the Sixers in moving forward. But let's dive right into things, and boy, how quickly life comes at you when you are in the Jimmy Butler experience. Let's not forget that just 8 days ago, we get this statement from Pat Riley saying, quote, "We usually don't comment on rumors, but all this speculation has become a distraction to the team, and that is not fair to the players and coaches. Therefore, we will make it clear. We are not trading Jimmy Butler." Well, revisit that statement today. We have this from Shams Charania saying first that the Miami Heat, Jimmy Butler has been suspended for 7 games for multiple instances of conduct detrimental to the team over the course of the season and particularly the last several weeks. And he quote tweets himself saying, "The Heat say they are opening to listening to all Jimmy Butler offers. Quote, throughout his actions and statements, he has shown he no longer wants to be a part of this team. Jimmy Butler and his representatives have indicated they wish to be traded. Therefore, we will listen to offers." And boy, isn't that always how it goes with Jimmy Butler. Now, to take the Sixers angle approach here, it should not be a surprise that they are a team that has mentioned the conversations. We have lived the Jimmy Butler experience here in Philadelphia. We got closer than we ever have before from a Sixers perspective at reaching the playoff aspirations, but he was not the solution then, and he certainly is not now. Now, let's just reflect on the Jimmy Butler experience as a whole. Let's think about how things have gone down for him since he has been in the NBA. And to dive into everything here, let's go stop by stop for Jimmy. So obviously he was drafted by the Chicago Bulls, an awesome story, got it out the mud, improved every year, grew into the legitimate franchise piece that we know him as today. Then he gets traded from Chicago because they opt for a rebuild, and he was consistently taking them to the playoffs. No concern there, normal business. Then he gets sent to the Timberwolves, takes them to the playoffs, and was the reason that they won. Forced to trade because he wanted to get paid. And in that situation, let's not forget playing with the Minnesota Timberwolves. That was the early days of Karl-Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins being a key part of this team, and really one of the issues was basically Jimmy Butler calling both those guys soft. Now, granted, at the time, I agreed with him, and I think that was a real thing. I think he was the driving force of that franchise, and that's really another part of this Jimmy Butler experience is every single individual situation, you can kind of squint your eyes and see where he's coming from. But when it is stop after stop after stop, and these same things happen, you got to kind of put 2 and 2 together here. But to continue on in the journey, this is where we get really familiar with the Jimmy Butler experience. That he goes to the 76ers, and this tweet, I would push back on this, but it says, was the best player on a team with Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, and JJ Redick. He wants to get paid. The 76ers go with Tobias Harris. And I do want to squash this bit of revisionist history, as there is quite a bit with the Jimmy Butler experience with the Sixers here. It was never about Tobias Harris versus Jimmy Butler. What it really was Jimmy Butler versus Ben Simmons. Now, granted, we know who Ben Simmons is today. He is the biggest waste of natural talent of any athlete I've ever seen, a guy who did truly lose his desire for the game, and physically, that has followed right along with him. Now, when you watch him today with the Brooklyn Nets, he simply is not the same player. Now, that is not to say, with all that at one point he was a legitimate all-star, a defensive player of the year candidate, a guy who truly was an impactful basketball player, albeit that he did have his flaws. At that point in time, where Ben Simmons was roughly a 23-year-old first-time all-star, still coming into his prime, it is completely understandable the Sixers made the gamble they did. Now, granted, they were as wrong as you possibly can be. But I think if you were to make all things equal, that you have a guy who had just forced himself out of 2 previous organizations, did not have the stellar record, and did not have the production and success that he now does, that he found down in Miami, that if you're making that decision between a guy who has been frustrated his previous 2 stops and even at his best is a good player, not what Ben could have grown into, it's understandable why they stuck with Simmons. And really, there was a bunch of fights behind the scenes as far as the point guard role. Both Ben and Jimmy wanted to play a ball-dominant style of basketball where they were running the offense. There was a lot going on, and shout out to Brett Brown for dealing with it all. But the bottom line is, ultimately, that was kind of the relationship. It was between Ben Simmons and Jimmy Butler. No doubt the Sixers got it wrong looking back, but I understand why they did. Then he signs with Miami. Everyone said his team is trash, and he just wanted to get paid. Told him to tank and sign a superstar with the cap space. Instead, he takes his team to the finals twice. Moreover, some people think Caleb Martin should have won Eastern Conference Finals Player of the Year. And by the way, this is very much a Jimmy Butler slanted tweet, but I did think it did a relatively decent job of presenting things. Shout out to Caleb Martin, too, by the way. Continues on when the team made it from the play-in because of Jimmy Butler. Absolutely true here, and I will even go as far as to say that particular series, and I believe this is the Milwaukee Bucks series that they're speaking about, Probably the most impressive individual stretch of basketball I've seen from just about any player. Certainly in my top 10 there. He was on another level, taking it to Giannis, screaming at the crowd. It was electric. That is Jimmy Butler. Then it continues on that Jimmy Butler says the Heat would beat the Celtics and the Knicks if he was playing. Pat Riley then tells him to shut up and dribble. Jimmy Butler says he wants to get paid. Pat Riley says, nah, you're old. And that's kind of how things go for that specific story. But to bring this from the Sixers side of things, did want to reflect on this report, which also came out today, saying that these Sixers targeted him in the offseason. The full report coming here, this from Vince Goodwill, says the Philadelphia 76ers tried to acquire Jimmy Butler in the offseason before signing Paul George. Quote, over the course of the summer, Philadelphia tried to engage Miami on a Butler deal before agreeing to long terms with George. Joel Embiid wanted a reunion with Butler and pushed for it, according to sources who spoke to Yahoo Sports over the summer and recently. So to me, this is a non-story that I think it should be obvious that the Sixers checked every single option that they had before ultimately having the opportunity to sign Paul George and then succeeding in that venture there. But the reality is, Paul George was the better option then, and he's the better option now for the Sixers team. And why I mean that specifically, I'm not going to push back on the argument. If you just want to compare them directly, 1v1, I even will hear out the argument that Paul George is not as good as Jimmy Butler. I understand it, and there's no doubt to me that there are these individual tears that Jimmy can go on that we've yet to see from Paul George, and I'm willing to accept that we may never see with Paul George. But what there is also with Paul George is a guy that is not going to cause a scene and is a much cleaner basketball fit. If we want to compare them directly as players this season, we'll start with Jimmy, who's averaging 17.6 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 4.7 assists, shooting 55.2% from the field, 37.5% from three. To compare that with Paul George, also not his best. 16.3 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists there, shooting 42.2% from the field, 33.6% from beyond the arc. I don't think either one of these guys have played to the level that their expectation is this year. But why I think it would be the wrong move to give up on Paul George and go attack Jimmy Butler is, well, for starters, it would require one of Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, or Joel Embiid just to make the money work. And to kind of take a peek at the Sixers' multi-year salary, you can get a look at each of these numbers here. That Paul George making $49 million this year, Jimmy, and to compare that to Jimmy's contract, a pretty clean fit. That Jimmy exactly pulling in. You can see the numbers here, and he does have that $52 million player option next year. That is notable because that is the root of all this issue. Yes, you can dress it up as I want to win. I want my basketball joy, whatever that means on the court. The reality is Jimmy Butler wants money. He wants this massive contract. Pat Riley is not willing to give it to him. And where that becomes complicated with the Sixers side of things is they can't exactly give it to him either. And I think that's sort of what is getting lost in translation here. Why they were so creative in creating this max spot for Paul George, why so many teams have been unable to, and looking ahead to this offseason will be unable to. What the Sixers did was very much keep Tyrese Maxey in the good graces and allow pen to hit the paper with Paul George first before that contract was directly sent over to Tyrese Maxey. It was a timing thing, and the reason that works is you can go above certain metrics and certain numbers and barriers and aprons and all the terminology that all this cap space stuff kind of entails here when you're re-signing your own player. That is not the case to sign others. Now, granted, the cap stuff has gotten further and further intricate, so I'm even having a hard time grasping myself as much as I've tried to dive into things. But my understanding is, with the current situation with the Sixers, if they were to trade for Jimmy Butler, it would not create this newfound financial freedom. You're only on the books for still paying him this year, and then at the minimum, he's opting into that player option. Frankly, you look around the NBA right now, I don't see a world where Jimmy Butler gets a contract anywhere close to that. And that says less about him than it does the state of the NBA, that there are these restrictions that are harsher than ever. We're talking not being able to have your draft picks if you're over the apron for certain periods. Now, all these financial restrictions for making trade worse. That's what makes this so complicated with Jimmy, is more likely than not, it's going to take at least two teams to make this fully work in a deal. And that takes one team willing to take on Jimmy Butler and the risk of the volatile athlete that he is. Now, granted, I understand the argument that Jimmy Butler could take the Sixers team to a level that Paul George may not. But my pushback to that is, how does this always end? Do you honestly think right now, and don't get me wrong, I'm not happy with the state of the Philadelphia 76ers. They do look soulless sometimes. They do need some more toughness. They do need some more dog in them. There's no doubt, and it's frustrating that we're complaining about this at this stage in the season. But is Jimmy guaranteed to be the good guy? Can you be guaranteed that you'll get his best behavior for the remainder of the season? Because I don't think that is the right bet. I don't think that is the optimistic bet. And for the people that are looking at this as if you do this deal, you get off Paul George's contract for the next 3 seasons. Sure, fair, true. But then what? How do you replace him? Is Jimmy just the answer there that you can give him this max deal? And there's areas where he would help and areas where he was hurt. There's no doubt about it. The additional ball handling that Jimmy would bring to this team is great. Him as a ball handler, him as a creator for others, him as the defensive-minded, athlete and player that he is would thrive in the Nick Nurse system. But there's also all the risks that come with it. Sometimes he just doesn't feel like shooting three-pointers. And frankly, as much as they're making it about these past couple games, I've watched Heat games this season from months ago where it looks like Jimmy was straight up disinterested then. That is the risk that you're constantly going to run with this guy. And there's been 4 organizations, the Sixers included, who've already kind of been burned with this. Let's not put on the rose-colored glasses and forget the downtimes of Jimmy Butler, of him saying, just get me to the fourth quarter, because he literally wouldn't shoot a shot for the first 3 quarters. Or the stretches, there was a whole month of the season during his time in Philly where he decided, I just don't feel like shooting three-pointers right now. And he only took mid-range. He would only walk into those. He would pass up open three-point looks. There was a lot of bad along with the good. So do I like Jimmy Butler as a basketball player? Absolutely. Is there a world in which I wish he could be the missing piece to this Sixers team? Sure. But is that the world we're living in? I just do not think so. I understand Paul George is not perfect. I understand the critiques with the version of him we've seen. I'm a little more sympathetic because of the knee injuries and really the erratic state of the team surrounding him more than anything, and am confident his best basketball is ahead. But what I do know about Paul George is he's not going to be tearing down this franchise in the way that Jimmy Butler absolutely could if things don't go his way if he comes here. And I also think it's pretty naive to believe for the first time like ever that a gold standard free agent just walked in and signed on the dotted line as a free agent here in Philadelphia to join the Sixers organization. If you go and trade him before even halfway through this NBA season, it's about as bad of a national look as you could possibly get. And I don't see Daryl Morey trying to take that level of PR hit for a player that is as risky as you can get from a personality standpoint. So in theory, Jimmy Butler makes sense. In actuality, I don't see a world where this benefits anyone with the Sixers at the forefront of that conversation. I understand if you guys want to see Jimmy Butler back in a Sixers uniform. There aren't that many athletes that have gotten along with Joel Embiid as well as Jimmy has, and I do think that is worth noting to an extent. But the reality is, I think the Sixers already made their bed, and now they got to sleep in it. It's on this team to turn things down internally, and while I still think there will be some moves around the edges to improve the roster, I don't think it is anything as seismic as Jimmy Butler. Let me know what you guys think in the comments and tell me if I'm wrong. If you want to scream at me and tell me why Jimmy Butler is the answer, would love to hear it. We'll not take offense to that. So drop your comments below. I do get the opposite outlook here. I'm not naive to believe that there's no world in which Jimmy Butler could help this Sixers team, but I do think the risk outweighs the rewards pretty significantly in this situation. So appreciate each and every one of you guys tuning into this video. As always, make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video. I'll be back talking to you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.